The air in the Vandenberg Air Force Base Officers Club was thick with the scent of pine needles and industrial floor wax, a sterile perfume clinging to the forced holiday cheer. Red and green streamers drooped from the ceiling tiles, sagging with a manufactured joy. Outside, a cold December rain lashed against the windows, each gust of wind a low moan that seeped through the weather stripping. Inside, the sound was different. It was the brittle clinking of wine glasses, the murmur of conversation spoken just a little too loudly, the scrape of chairs against polished linoleum. It was the sound of people trying to convince themselves they were having a good time. This was the annual Christmas charity dinner, an event designed to look good on paper and in the base newsletter. Officers were strongly encouraged to attend, to donate, to mingle. It was a performance of community. In a corner, far from the boisterous cluster of junior officers near the bar, an old man sat alone. His name was Silas Jones. He occupied a small, two-person table meant for overflow, a forgotten island in the sea of crisp, blue uniforms. His coat was a faded olive drab, clean but worn thin at the elbows and collar, the fabric softened by 1,000 washings. It was a civilian coat, but it held a memory of military bearing in its straight seams. He did not look at the crowd. His gaze was fixed on the white porcelain cup cradled in his hands. Steam rose from it in a lazy, hypnotic spiral. His hands, webbed with the fine lines of age, had a slight, almost imperceptible tremor. Yet the cup he held was perfectly, unnaturally still. It did not rattle. It did not slosh. The liquid inside was a placid, dark surface. This stillness was his defining characteristic. While the room buzzed with the nervous energy of ambition and social maneuvering, Silas was a pocket of absolute calm. He was a rock in a chattering stream. The noise of the room broke around him, leaving him untouched. Then, a new sound cut through the din laughter. It was sharp, confident, and edged with the casual cruelty of the young and powerful. Captain Eva Rostova had arrived. She moved through the club, not like a guest, but like an owner inspecting her property. Her uniform was so sharply creased, it looked like it could draw blood. Her silver captain's bars gleamed under the fluorescent lights, freshly polished. She was flanked by two lieutenants, young men with identical haircuts and eager, sycophantic smiles. They were her court. Rostova's eyes, the color of slate, scanned the room with a quick, dismissive arrogance. She was 28 years old, a graduate of the academy, top of her flight class. She had just been given a command billet overseeing a new satellite tracking initiative, a fast track to major. She believed, with the unshakable faith of the newly anointed, that she was the future. Her gaze swept past the clumps of senior officers, past the mingling families, and then it snagged on the corner table. It snagged on Silas. Her brow furrowed, a stain on the otherwise perfect picture. "What is that?" she said, her voice a low blade of sound. One of the lieutenants followed her gaze. "Looks like one of the local charity cases, ma'am," he offered. "They let some of the town's needy in for a hot meal." "Good PR." Rostova's lip curled. "Not in the O Club," she hissed. "This is a private event. For us." The unspoken word hung in the air. Us. The worthy. The important. She started moving toward the corner table, her entourage trailing behind her like pilot fish. Her internal monologue was a torrent of righteous indignation. This was her club, her night. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to have the pristine image of her success tarnished by some vagrant, some homeless man who had wandered in off the street, drawn by the lights and the promise of a free meal. It was a security breach. It was an insult. She reached the table, her shadow falling over Silas. He did not look up. He continued to stare into his cup, as if it held all the secrets of the universe. "Excuse me," Rostova said. Her voice was loud enough to make the nearby tables fall silent. Silas gave no sign he had heard. "I said, excuse me," she repeated, her tone sharpening. Slowly, deliberately, Silas raised his head. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky. They were clear and calm, holding no fear, no deference, no anger. They were simply watching. "This is a private function," Rostova stated. planting her hands on her hips. "I'm afraid you'll have to leave." Silas's gaze remained steady. He took a slow sip from his cup. The silence stretched. Then his voice, a low, gravelly thing that seemed to come from deep within the earth. "I was invited." The simple statement infuriated Rostova more than any argument could have. It was a quiet denial of her authority. "Invited?" she scoffed, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Invited by who?" "The ghosts of Christmas past." Her lieutenants snickered on cue. Across the room, working the buffet line, a young man in a server's white jacket felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Airman First Class Miller. He was the one. He had invited Silas. Miller had met the old man a month ago at the base library. Silas was always there, reading dense books on astrophysics and aeronautical engineering. They had struck up a conversation about orbital mechanics, and Miller, a satellite communications tech, had been stunned by the old man's depth of knowledge. He learned Silas lived alone in a small apartment off base. He wasn't homeless, just solitary. When Miller found out his new friend would be alone for Christmas, he had used his volunteer credentials for the dinner to sign Silas in as his guest. It seemed like the right thing to do. Now, watching Captain Rostova loom over the quiet old man, it felt like he had led a lamb to slaughter. He wanted to rush over, to explain, but he was an airman first class. She was a captain. He was a nobody. She was a commander. He felt rooted to the spot by the sheer weight of the rank on her shoulders. Rostova leaned in closer to Silas, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, mocking whisper. "Look, Pops, I don't have time for this. Show me your invitation. Show me your military ID." She knew he would have neither. It was a checkmate. Silas did not reach for a wallet. He simply placed his cup back on its saucer. The porcelain made a soft, definitive click in the now silent room. "That won't be necessary," he said, his voice still impossibly calm. Rostova's face flushed with anger. This old man's placidity was a personal affront. It was defiance. It was disrespect. Her friends were watching. The whole room was watching. She had to win. Her eyes fell on a small, dark object pinned to the lapel of his worn coat. It was a piece of metal enameled in black, shaped like a stylized, almost abstract ghost. It was small, no bigger than a thumbnail, and looked ancient. "What's that supposed to be?" she sneered, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at it. "Your veteran's medal. Let me guess, you were a cook back in the day. What was your call sign, Spatula?" The insult, so petty and juvenile, hung in the heavy air. Spatula. The word seemed to echo in the quiet, but it was the other word that landed. Ghost. The pin on his coat. For the first time, a flicker of something changed in Silas's eyes. The quiet room, the arrogant captain, the smell of pine, it all faded away. The past rushed in, not as a memory, but as a living, breathing thing. He is in the cockpit again. The air is thin, tasting of ozone and recycled oxygen. He wears a bulky, pressurized suit, a fragile shell against the unforgiving void. Below him, the world is a gentle blue curve, the atmosphere a delicate, glowing membrane. He is at 90,000 feet on the very edge of space. The sky above is not blue, but a deep, star-dusted black. The machine around him is not an airplane. It is a myth, a whisper, the State Route 91 Aurora. It is a hypersonic reconnaissance craft, a black project so secret that every nut, bolt, and wire in it is officially denied to exist. The hum of its pulse detonation engines is a low, predatory growl that he feels in his bones. Mach 5. The world blurs below. A voice crackles in his helmet, distorted by distance and encryption. "Spectre, this is Pegasus. Confirm telemetry." Spectre. That was his name here. Silas Jones did not exist in this sky. Only Spectre, the ghost. He was the lead test pilot, the man they trusted with a machine that was more theory than reality. A multi-billion-dollar phantom. Suddenly, a klaxon screams. Red lights flash across the control panel, painting his visor in the color of blood. Engine 2 is overheating, a catastrophic cascade failure in the magnetic containment field. The voice from Pegasus is frantic. "Spectre, eject. Eject now. The protocol is to ditch the asset. Eject." Let the most advanced aircraft ever built by humankind tear itself apart and rain down over hostile territory. No. His hands, the same hands that now held a coffee cup with perfect stillness, move with a surgeon's precision. He ignores the eject handle. He cuts the fuel flow to engine 2, manually overrides the cooling system, and shunts the auxiliary power to the primary engine. The G-forces try to tear him apart as the craft shudders violently, a wounded beast screaming its pain. He fights it. He talks to it. He coaxes it. He flies a dying star back from the edge of night. He lands it on a forgotten strip of desert runway, the tires exploding on impact, the frame groaning in protest. He saved it. He saved them all. The pin on his coat was the unofficial emblem of the Aurora program, a small black ghost, given only to the 3 men who had ever flown it. The other 2 were long dead. The flashback receded, leaving an echo of thunder in the quiet room. Silas looked at Captain Rostova, and for a fleeting second, she was not a captain. She was just a child, a loud, frightened child. Airman Miller saw the shift in the old man's eyes. It was a look of immense, ancient weariness mixed with something else, something that looked like pity. And in that moment, Miller's fear was eclipsed by a fierce, protective anger. He saw Rostova's hand move. He saw her fingers close around Silas's thin arm. That was it, the line. Miller turned, slipping behind a large, fake poinsettia plant. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling with the cold screen. He scrolled to a single contact, entered only as CW. The base commander, Colonel Wallace, had given him a number after seeing Miller and Silas talking in the library one day. "That man is a national treasure, Airman," Wallace had said, his voice unusually grave. "If he ever needs anything, and I mean anything at all, you call me directly, day or night." Miller had thought it was a figure of speech. Now, his thumb hovered over the call button. Was this an emergency? An arrogant captain hassling an old man. He looked back at the scene. Rostova was now trying to pull Silas to his feet. "That's it, old man," she snarled, her face inches from his. "You're coming with me. We'll have security forces sort you out. Trespassing on a federal installation is a serious offense." She was physically touching him. She was threatening him. Miller pressed the button. The phone rang once, twice. A clipped, impatient voice answered. "Wallace." "Colonel, sir," Miller stammered, his voice a whisper. "This is Airman Miller. From the library. It's Mr. Jones, sir. He's at the O Club. There's a Captain Cheese." He didn't need to finish. The colonel's voice turned to ice. "We're in the O Club, Airman. The main ballroom, sir. By the back corner. Stay there. I am 5 minutes out." The line went dead. 5 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. Rostova gave Silas's arm a sharp tug. "Let's go. Now." Silas did not resist, but he did not help. He was an immovable object. He just looked at her, his pale blue eyes holding a deep, profound sadness. The main doors of the ballroom, 2 large oak behemoths, suddenly burst inward. They didn't slam against the walls. They were caught, held open by 2 massive security forces sergeants in full tactical gear. Between them, a figure strode into the room, and the temperature seemed to plummet. Colonel David Wallace, commander of Vandenberg Air Force Base, moved with the coiled energy of a predator. His dress blues were immaculate, his chest a solid wall of ribbons, his colonel's eagles gleaming on his shoulders. His face was a mask of controlled fury. The music, a tinny version of Jingle Bell Rock, sputtered and died. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze halfway to a mouth. The only sound was the rhythmic, percussive echo of Colonel Wallace's boots on the floor. Clack, clack, clack. Captain Rostova froze. Her hand was still clamped on Silas's arm. Her mouth fell slightly open. Confusion warred with terror on her face. She was the ranking officer here, besides the club manager. Why was the base commander here? And why did he look like he was ready to declare war? Wallace's eyes, chips of granite, scanned the room for a single, searing second before locking onto the corner table. He saw Rostova. He saw her hand on the old man's arm. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He ignored her completely. He marched directly to Silas, his path unwavering. The crowd of officers parted before him like water before the hull of a battleship. He stopped 2 feet from Silas's chair. He drew himself up to his full height. His back went ramrod straight. In the dead silence of the room, he brought his right hand up in a salute. It was not a casual gesture. It was a salute of such precision, such force, such profound reverence that it seemed to pull all the air out of the room. It was the kind of salute a knight might give his king. "Mr. Jones," Colonel Wallace's voice boomed, sharp and clear and utterly devoid of the anger that had been on his face. It was filled with something else entirely. "Awe. It is an honor to see you, sir." Silas looked up at the colonel and gave a slow, small nod. "David," he said, his gravelly voice carrying in the stillness. "Good to see you." Rostova finally let go of Silas's arm, as if it had burned her. She snapped to attention, her mind reeling. "Mr. Jones?" "Sir." "Colonel, sir," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. This man had no identification. I thought he was a security risk." Wallace did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Silas. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, his voice gentle. Silas nodded again. "I'm fine, David." The captain was just enthusiastic. Only then did Colonel Wallace turn. He did not turn his whole body, just his head. He pinned Captain Rostova with a gaze so cold it could have frozen helium. The fury was back, a white-hot furnace behind his eyes. "Captain," he began, his voice dangerously soft. "This man's identification is etched into the very bedrock of this base. His security clearance is written in the sky above our heads. His contribution is the air you are not worthy to breathe." He took a step toward her. She flinched. "You stand there in your pristine uniform, so proud of those silver bars you just pinned on, and you dare to lay a hand on a living legend." Wallace turned to address the entire spellbound room. His voice rose, filling every corner of the ballroom with the weight of history. "For those of you who do not know," he roared, "allow me to educate you. You think our mission here began with GPS and commercial satellite launches. You think the high ground was won with computers and drones." He pointed a rigid finger at Silas, who sat watching with that same unnerving calm. "It was won by men like this. Men who strapped themselves to rockets and rode them into the dark. This is Silas Jones." The name meant nothing to the young officers. It was just a name. "But I suspect," Wallace continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "that some of you might recognize his call sign." He paused, letting the silence build, letting the tension become unbearable. "They called him Spectre." A few gasps rippled through the older officers in the room, the grizzled majors and lieutenant colonels. Their eyes widened in disbelief. Spectre. It was a ghost story, a myth told in hushed tones by flight instructors and old-school engineers. The pilot of the Aurora, the man who flew faster and higher than anyone in history, in an aircraft that didn't exist. Wallace wasn't finished. On October 23, 1991, during a test flight over the Pacific, the prototype state Route 91 suffered a catastrophic engine failure at Mach 52 and 92,000 feet. The protocol, the absolute standing order, was to eject and allow the asset to be destroyed. It was a $200 billion aircraft. Losing it would have set American aerospace dominance back 30 years. He locked his eyes back on Rostova. Spectre disobeyed that order. He flew a dead-stick landing from the edge of space. He landed a 200-ton glider made of burning metal and broken dreams on a dry lake bed in Nevada. He did not save an aircraft, Captain. He saved the future. The technology in your satellites, the guidance systems you command, the very existence of this base's modern mission, it was all born from the data they pulled from that wreckage. Wreckage that only existed because this man refused to quit. He gestured to the small, black pin on Silas's coat. That pin, Captain, is not a souvenir. It was hand-milled from a piece of the recovered fuselage of the Aurora. Only 3 were ever made. Mr. Jones is the only one left alive to wear it. The room was tomb-silent. The weight of the revelation settled over them, suffocating. Rostova's face had gone from flushed red to a pasty, sickly white. Her entire world, her entire sense of self-importance, had just been dismantled and incinerated before her eyes. Wallace now moved until he was directly in front of her, his voice dropping back to that lethally soft tone. The officer's creed, Captain. I will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate among us anyone who does. You did not lie. You did something worse. You displayed an arrogance so profound, an ignorance so vast, that you humiliated a man to whom every single person in this room owes a debt they can never repay. He leaned in, his voice a razor's edge. You mistook quiet dignity for weakness. You mistook age for irrelevance. You, Captain Rostova, are a failure, not as an officer, as a human being. He straightened up, his voice becoming formal and cold, the voice of pure command. Captain Eva Rostova, you are hereby relieved of your command of the 14th Space Surveillance Squadron, effective immediately. You are confined to your quarters. Your career in the United States Air Force is over. You will be reassigned to a position so remote, so mind-numbingly dull, that the only thing you will ever command again is a photocopier. Am I clear? Yes, sir, she whispered, her voice cracking. Tears were now streaming silently down her face, carving paths through her carefully applied makeup. Sergeant, Wallace barked to one of the security men. Escort this person from my club. Ensure her two shadows find their way back to their kennels as well. The two lieutenants, who had been trying to melt into the wallpaper, flinched as if struck. The sergeant took Rostova's arm, his grip firm but professional. She didn't resist. She was a ghost already, a hollow shell being led from the scene of her own execution. As she was marched toward the door in utter disgrace, the assembled officers did not look at her. They looked at Silas Jones. They looked at him with a new, dawning reverence. Wallace turned back to the old man, his expression softening instantly. Sir, on behalf of the entire United States Air Force, I apologize. Profoundly. Please, allow me to escort you to my table. It would be my honor if you would take my seat. He gestured toward the head table, where a single, important-looking chair sat empty. Silas looked from the colonel's earnest face to the offered seat of honor. Then he looked across the room and found the terrified face of Airman Miller, who was still trying to hide behind the poinsettia. Silas gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Thank you, David, but that's not necessary. His voice was still quiet, but it held an immense authority. He looked at the disgraced captain being led away. She is young, Colonel, Silas said, his voice laced with a strange, weary pity. The young are loud, so they might be heard over the sound of their own fear. He then pushed his chair back and rose slowly to his feet. He walked not toward the head table, but toward the buffet line. The crowd of officers, from lieutenants to lieutenant colonels, parted for him as if by royal decree. It was a silent, spontaneous honor guard. He stopped beside Airman Miller. He placed a steady, warm hand on the young man's shoulder. Miller looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Come on, son, Silas said gently. I believe you promised me a Christmas dinner. I'm partial to the turkey. Together, the living legend and the young airman walked to the buffet. Silas picked up a plate. He served himself, just another man in a line. But no one saw him that way anymore. He returned not to his corner table, but to a larger one in the center of the room that had been silently, instantly vacated for him. He and Miller sat down and began to eat, the world slowly, cautiously starting to turn again around them. The aftermath was swift and absolute. Captain Eva Rostova was formally reassigned to Thule Air Base in Greenland, tasked with inventory management for the base supply warehouse. It was a career death sentence, a slow, cold fade into obscurity. Her name became a cautionary tale at the academy. Colonel Wallace, true to his word, instituted a new mandatory training block for all personnel at Vandenberg. It was a history lesson, a course in humility. It was officially designated Leadership and Heritage Seminar 101. Unofficially, everyone on base called it the Spectre Protocol. A week later, the rain had passed. A weak winter sun cast long shadows across the quiet residential street a few miles from the base. In a small, meticulously tidy apartment that smelled of old books and lemon polish, Silas Jones sat by his window. He held a small, black ghost pen in the palm of his hand. With a soft cloth, he polished its smooth, dark surface, his motions slow and deliberate. The world outside rushed on, loud and busy and blissfully unaware. It did not know the giant who sat in the quiet room, watching the dust motes dance in the sunlight. And that was just the way he wanted it. The silence he had cultivated for so long was not an absence of sound. It was a presence. It was the loudest, most powerful thing he owned.